The Art of Being Ruled. Wyndham Lewis. Original publication 1926. 1989 edition. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Part 9. Man and Shaman. Chapter 3. Call Yourself a Man. And it is in the experiences of wartime that we must seek not only the impulsion, but in some sense the justification, of male sex inversion, apart from its riddle in relation to the disintegration of the family unit. As a wartime birth, it can be regarded as a reply to the implications of responsibility of those times, nature's never again in the overstrained male organism. After the war, it was reported that French mothers, who had lost masses of expensive children at the moment when their long task of nurture was about to be rewarded, were vociferating, as they probably did, that they would bring no more children into the world to be brought up and then killed. But more than the mothers, during the war no doubt men too were saying to themselves subconsciously that at last, beyond any doubt, the game was not worth the candle, that the heroic age was nothing to this, that the kiss they would receive when they came back again, if they ever did not make them look any less foolish as heroes, but more so, and that the institution of manhood had in some way overreached itself or got into the caricatural stage. Men were only made into men with great difficulty even in primitive society. The male is not naturally a man any more than the woman. He has to be propped up into that position with some ingenuity, and is always likely to collapse. We have defined with some care what was intended by the term woman, and we can now do the same for the term man. The term man implies a variety of indispensable but not necessarily pleasant things, quite independently of the specific sex characters, although it can only be attached to an individual falling within the subdivision of the adult male. The identification by means of sex character on the part of adult males has always been a source of mortification to women and children, and at the present juncture some more neutral term should be substituted for it if we are to divert female energy into a less competitive and imitative channel. There is no visible alternative to this except that of abandoning entirely to women the attributes associated with this term. Either the word, or the attributes for which it stands, would have to be given up. Otherwise women must still insist on being men, and war to the knife over that ridiculous name, and the ghastly privileges that accompany it, must result. A man, then, is made, not born, and he is made, of course, with very great difficulty. From the time he yells and kicks in his cradle, to the time he receives his last kick at school, he is recalcitrant. And it is not until he is about 30 years old that the present European becomes resigned to an erect position. There are very many male Europeans today who never become reconciled to the idea of being men, leaving out of count those who are congenitally unadapted for the rigors of manhood. At 35, 45, 55, und so weiter, you find them still luxuriously and rebelliously prostrate, still pouting, lisping, and sobbing, spread-eagled on their backs, helpless and inviting caresses, like a bald-stomached dog. With infinite difficulty a man is, in the first place as a baby, put upon his feet, and invited to toddle. A period elapses which is the equivalent of the life of many a large-sized animal before he can walk on his hind legs at all respectably, and few men ever become entirely at ease in the erect position. So that eventually he should be able to get about without danger to himself and other people, cross the road, mount a bus, and so forth. Infinite pains are expended on him. He is taught during 10 years a host of symbols to prepare him for the subsequent feats of independence expected of him, and at every moment of his tutelage he is resentful and rebellious. He does not want, if he can possibly help it, to be a man, not at least if it is so difficult. And to the end of his life he is not persuaded of the point of it all, and when he reflects about it, regards all this preparation and fuss, for nothing, or so little for what is the famous adult life for which all preparation is made, that it is hardly worth mentioning, as a meaningless evolution. So a man is an entirely artificial thing, like everything else that is an object of our grudging admiration. Or if there is an exception to this rule, it is the abnormal or exceptional man, whom we worship as a hero, and whose unnatural erectness arouses almost more hatred than surprise. Prostration is our natural position. A worm-like movement from a spot of sunlight to a spot of shade, and back, is the type of movement that is natural to men. As active, erect, and humane creatures they are in a constantly false position, and behaving in an abnormal way. They have to be pushed up into it, and held there, till it has become a habit only to lie down at night, and at the first real opportunity they collapse and are full length once more. The snarling objurgations of the poor man's life, such as be a man, banteringly and coaxingly, or call yourself a man, with threatening contempt, arouse the man in the male still, but we can confidently look forward to the time, now, when this feminine taunt will be without effect. A sense of duty is what we call the system of psychological injunctions, painfully learnt and easily discarded, by which all the useful actions of social life are effected. But that sense, in its turn, depends on the vanity, and the vanity requires its regulation food, which gets scarcer every day. Although all people depend for this staff of life, like a populous island for its nourishment, on other people, since few are such monsters as to grow it themselves. But the vanity even is not such a primary thing as is usually supposed. Call yourself a man. At once puts it in motion. But it depends on the concept man for its effectiveness. And that is a belief, like a belief in God. Reduce a man's vanity below a certain point, or destroy his capacity for belief, and he subsides into his natural and primitive conditions. The instinct of self-preservation would be dragged in as a hypothetic support of the man attacked with the remark, call yourself a man. But the instinct of self-preservation is artificial too. It is the result of training and experience. Before a child has burned its finger or is sufficiently documented about what will ensue if it puts its finger in the fire, it is not afraid of fire. What it is painfully acquiring during the years of its gradual propping up and training in erectness, is a personality. Without a personality there is no instinct of preservation, or rather, the less personality there is, the less horror is there at the idea of losing it. Many animals whose lot it is to be eaten are probably willingly eaten, as has been already suggested. When the male of the Epeira is devoured by its mate in the midst of its tumescence, that is part of the fun. The average civilized man is so precariously erect that it is almost laughable to watch him at times, on those occasions, for instance, when from vanity or a sense of duty he is addressing himself to a distasteful and difficult task, like looking at pictures in a gallery, reading Das Kapital, or watching a good play. The grinding boredom you realize that he must be experiencing makes a mechanical hero of him as a very heavy machine that lifts itself into the air, and flies like an eagle, could be termed a hero in the way of a machine. The gravitational pull from the prostrate depths of the abyss which he had to sustain should earn him, on these occasions, any title he might covet. It is not more natural for one sex than for the other to be heroic or to be responsible, then. The position of the male today, and the symbolism of the word man, are purely artificial. No more for one sex than for the other are the heroic ardors, intellectuality, responsibility, and so forth, that we associate with the male, natural. Men had grown to regard them as natural, because in the first place they had seemed profitable. But now the rewards associated with the exercise of these manly duties are a little flat and stale. The depreciation in the value of the psychological side has brought down with it in some obscure way the physical or sensual side. The psychological element in the reward for the man was, of course, the vanity element in the notion of power. The industry, courage, and responsibility of the male are artificial, and have only been sustained and kept in place by a system of rewards, like everything else in this world, reward that has sometimes been of the nature of loot, and sometimes of a juridical nexum. We will examine in a moment the nature of these rewards. The male has been persuaded to assume a certain onerous and disagreeable relay with the promise of rewards, material and psychological. Women may in the first place even have put it into his head. Be a man. May have been, metaphorically, what Eve uttered at the critical moment in the Garden of Eden. The large, bloated, and sinewy appearance of the male, again, is partly the result of manual work or physical exercise, but is the result as well of thousands of years of acting themen. The more muscular frame of the male, and his greater hardihood, are illusions, like everything else about him, provisionally and precariously realized, but no more stable than the muscular development produced by some intensive course of physical exercise, resulting in the inflation of this system of muscles or that. He is blown out by vanity into a bigger and bonier creature than his consort, like Shakespeare's Ajax. He is in reality just the same size, and of just the same sort. The male is by nature, uninflated by vanity and physical exercise, as muscleless, slight, and as we say feminine, both physically and mentally, as the female. There is no mysterious difference between the nature of the sexes, except the secondary differences we have been considering. If you persist in referring to the woman not only as the woman but as the Sphinx, as a certain contemporary intellectual energumene does, what word would you have left for yourself? Remove the arbitrary psychological machinery that in this way constitutes the mere male a man, or tamper with it too much, or overtax it, and he collapses and becomes to all intents and purposes a woman. The functional difference, then, alone separates them. It is only functional differences that separate any one thing from another. If the duration of this collapse were at all considerable, even a functional readjustment would probably occur. The extreme rapidity with which these collapses occur, both in the specifically adipose bulk of the female, and the secondary muscular manliness of the male, has been witnessed since the war. In more primitive times than ours, the exaggerated dimensions of the northern male, who vaingloriously blew himself out, and tiptoed himself up, till he was over 6 feet high, and weighed 15 stone, has probably been the cause of our northern stock sticking culturally as it has done. The little Mediterranean man would not have understood these manly monstrosities, nor could he have done what he did if he had allowed himself any such functional specialization. For this size actually suggested to our ancestors perhaps the idea of an independent function, like the female's procreative one, the function, namely, of the fighting machine. Northern neighbors, or neighboring northern tribes, would flash their eyes at each other, and blow themselves out till they hardly had room for any more spectacular sinew, and then fling themselves on each other in mortal combat. Their manliness became a mania.